Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to continue our first chapter with a review of solving linear inequalities. First, to go over some vocabulary, talking about intervals. Intervals is the parts of our graph that are shaded. So let's say that I have 1, 2, and 3, and we're shading here. So the shaded part is our interval. A finite interval has two endpoints. So the 1 and the 3 are the endpoints, making this a finite interval. An infinite interval, let's say that we have this, and we go this way. We have an arrow going to the right. 2 is technically our only endpoint. So we have one endpoint going to one of the infinities, makes it an infinite interval. A reminder of our symbols, we have less than or greater than. That means that whatever value that is not included in our answer, and it's an open circle when we graph it. And then we have the equal to's. If it's equal to's, then whatever value it is that's there means it's included in our answer, and our graph has a closed circle. So let's try a couple. This is just writing what the inequality would look like based on the graph. I see that my left side is at -3 and my right side is at 2. So that means our graph starts at -3 and stops at 2. Our -3 is a closed circle. -3 is less than all of these numbers that are shaded. So we have less than or equal to. We're going to go ahead and pick a letter for a variable, any letter we want. I'm going to go ahead and pick B. And then we have 2. All of these numbers that are shaded are less than the 2, and that's a closed circle, so it's going to be equal to as well. -3 is less than or equal to B, is less than or equal to 2. Example B. We're still starting at that -3 on the left and ending at the 2 on the right. This time our -3 is not filled in, but it's still less than all of these values that are shaded on our line. So we're only going to have a less than this time, not an equal to. Again, we can pick any variable we want. I'll go ahead and pick a t. Again, all of the numbers that are shaded are less than the 2, and the 2 is a filled in circle, so that's going to be an equal to. -3 is less than t, is less than or equal to 2. For letter C, we have an arrow. That's -infinity. -infinity is less than 2. Let's pick a variable, anything we want. I'll go ahead and pick an S. We know that we're going less than. The 2 is solid, filled circle, that's equal to, and 2. S is less than or equal to 2. Letter D. We're starting at the 2 this time and going over to positive infinity. These numbers are all greater than 2. So we know we're greater than 2. Let's pick a variable, anything we want. I'll go ahead and I'll pick a W. The 2 is not filled in, so we don't need a line through there underneath the inequality. W is greater than 2. Go ahead onto the back side of your notes. Let's talk about something called interval notation. You may or may not have seen this before, but it's a different way of writing the inequalities. It uses parentheses and brackets to show where the graph starts and ends and kind of cuts out the variable in the middle. One thing that I think is probably the most confusing about this is that sometimes, because of the parentheses, it looks like it's an ordered pair when it's actually not. So we have to make sure we're careful that we're clear about am I talking about ordered pairs right now, or am I talking about intervals for x's or y's or whatever variable it is that we're using? If we have an open circle, that means we're using a parenthesis. The parenthesis and the open circle are both saying that value is not part of our answer, but it starts or ends where our answer is at. And then a closed circle goes with a bracket. Closed circles means that whatever the value is part of our answer. And so it starts or stops with that answer included. One key thing that I would make sure that I highlight here is that we always use parentheses for infinity. And the reason for that is we don't know what infinity is. We don't have a value for that. So if I don't know what it is, I don't know for sure if it's included or not. And so that's why we leave it as a parenthesis. Let's try some of these. Here we have our very first example in the inequality notation that we wrote. This is what we wrote for the back side of this page that we're on. So to write it in interval notation, we start with the fact that that was a closed circle and it was equal to. That means it gets a bracket. And we have -3. We drop the x and place a comma. And then we go to the 2. That also was an equal to, a closed circle. And so that is also a bracket. And so our interval notation would start and stop with brackets and be -3, 2. I kind of like it because once you get used to it, it kind of takes down on the amount of stuff that you need to write. Letter B. We're starting at -3 and stopping at 2. We have a comma in between there. The -3 is an open circle. It's not equal to, and so that is a parenthesis. And the 2 is a closed circle. It is equal to, making that a bracket. So parenthesis -3, 2 bracket. Inequality notation, we do have to add the inequality itself. And so we are over here at -infinity and we're stopping at 2. So the left side stays on the left when we're writing it in interval notation, and the right side stays on the right. Remember, we just said parentheses always gets, infinity always gets a parenthesis. And then the 2 is a closed circle, and so that is a bracket. And that would be interval notation. Letter D, we're going from 2 now to positive infinity. The 2 is on the left. The positive infinity is on the right. The 2 is an open circle, and so that will be open. Please ignore this. That's a typo. My apologies. And infinity always gets a parenthesis. So 2, infinity is our interval notation. Go ahead and skip those bottom 2 and go to the next page, please. All right, solving. So now that we've talked about what the solutions look like on a number line and writing interval notation and inequality notation, we're going to solve them. Remember, we're still using backwards order of operation, or SADMET. We want to use all the same rules that we did for solving regular equations, where we get rid of or eliminate parentheses first. And then we combine like terms. and then we can go on to backwards order of operations. But please, 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 please don't forget that when we multiply or divide by a negative number, okay, it's only multiplying, dividing, only by a negative, then we have to switch the inequality symbol to the opposite direction. Let's try a couple. Solving the inequalities. All right, so for letter A, we don't have any parentheses there, so I don't have to worry about that. I do want to go ahead and move my x's together. This is a negative 5x. My opposite is adding 5x to the other side. 2 plus 5 is 7x. We're going to bring down that plus 4. We have greater than or equal to. Negative 5x plus 5x is 0. And bring down the 4. Now we're using PEMDAS backwards. The opposite of adding is subtracting. We will subtract the 4. We have 7x. We subtracted. We did not divide or multiply by a negative. So the inequality stays the same direction. And 4 minus 4 is 0. The opposite of multiplying x by 7 is dividing by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1x. We divided, but it was by a positive, so we don't change the direction. And 0 divided by 7 is 0. So if I were to graph that on a number line, I'm going to plot 0 in the middle. I'm just going to label every other one here to make it a little easier. 0 is filled in circle because it's equal to, and greater than are the numbers over here to the right side. So that's what my number line graph would be. The inequality notation is exactly what our answer looks like. And then our interval notation, we're starting at 0 and then going to positive infinity. 0 is on the left, positive infinity is on the right. So we have, and I'm going to draw this up here, 0, comma, positive infinity. The 0 is a filled in circle. That is a bracket. And infinity always gets a parenthesis. For letter B, we have to start with eliminating or getting rid of those parentheses. Remember, this is really a minus 1 in front of there. So we're going to keep the 2 and distribute that negative 1 to both the x and the negative 3. Negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3. We keep the sign of greater than and 7. Yes, we multiplied by a negative, but we weren't doing that across the inequality sign, so we don't change it. We have like terms of 2 and 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. Now we can use backwards PEMDAS. This is a positive 5. The opposite is to subtract 5 from both sides. 5 minus 5 is 0. Please don't forget to bring this minus along with the x because that is a negative x. We subtracted, not multiplying or dividing, so we don't change the direction of that inequality. And 7 minus 5 is 2. This is a negative 1 times x. The opposite is to divide both sides by negative 1. So we have now positive 1x. We divided by a negative, so our sign has to change directions. And 2 divided by negative 1 is negative 2. I'm going to put negative 2 here. And again, I'm just writing every other one to make it a bit easier. This is not equal to, so we have an open circle at negative 2. Less than goes to the left and negative infinity. And so this is what my graph would look like. Our inequality notation is that x is less than negative 2. Interval notation. On the left side, we have an arrow, which is negative infinity. On the right side, we have negative 2. Infinities always get parentheses. And the negative 2 is an open circle, so that gets a parenthesis as well. This is where we are going to pause for today. Thanks so much for joining me. Have a great rest of your night.